In New York at the United Nations headquarters television studios, our World Opinion Forum guest is Lucy Law Webster, a former United Nations political affairs officer working in disarmament affairs. She has since gone on to represent over the years some of the world's leading non-governmental organizations involved in the efforts to achieve peace, disarmament, economic security and justice, and women's rights through world law. To begin our conversation, I asked her reaction to recent political developments in the United States.
With the announcement that Chuck Hagel is very likely to become the next American Secretary of Defense, to the delight of many in the disarmament community and the NGO disarmament movement worldwide, he is an active and vocal supporter of nuclear zero. How important is this?
Oh, I think it's marvelous. Not only the fact that he's connected with the global zero movement, but also that he has a creative mind. He's not stuck in some earlier mode of Cold War confrontation with the Soviet Union, which of course doesn't exist anymore. I think he is a very intelligent, open-minded, flexible, looking for opportunities kind of person. And I think that his indications on that basis fit in very well with what President Obama said in April, was it 2011, when he called for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. I think that's very important.
What would you, if you were to advise the Secretary of Defense, the new Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, what would you urge him to do?
Well, I haven't been following the details of the different strategies enough in recent years since I left the UN Secretariat, where I was writing articles on this subject. But off the cuff, I would say that go for any opening that looks like it might move forward. Now, I don't know whether the proposed comprehensive nuclear disarmament treaty that would sort of circumvent the NPT, which is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is of course not really fair. It started with the premise that the 5 existing nuclear powers at the date when the NPT was being developed were going to be able to keep their nuclear weapons and that no one else would have them. And that has not entirely worked because several important countries have not agreed, have not de facto avoided the development of nuclear weapons. So long as the 5 winners of World War II, and who happen also to be the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, keep their weapons, and the United States and Russia have a large number, it's only to be expected that countries like North Korea, Iran, and others, Israel, will want to either keep theirs or develop them. And so it's, an asymmetrical situation that isn't really right. But whether it's strategically and tactically useful to go for that objective at this point, I'm not quite sure.
At least it's an opportunity for the United States, the first nation to develop nuclear weapons and the only nation to use them. It's an opportunity for the United States now to actually take the lead.
Yes, I think Chuck Hagel might be very valuable for doing that and working with the U.S. leaders who have a great deal of credibility as being involved in the Cold War competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, people who were respected then and are still respected and who have come out for global zero, as has Chuck Hagel. So I think this is an opportunity to promote that idea as being mainstream. I think that's a very important position to take. That is the mainstream. Let us not go with the right wing that is trying to spend money on Cold War weapons for the sake of the industry or for the sake of some historical stance. Now we can move beyond that. We can move into a new posture.
There is going to, of course, be tremendous resistance to this. You suggested a moment the arms manufacturers, the military-industrial complex,
Yes.
about which Eisenhower warned. That is still very much firmly in place and is obviously going to resist some of the things that Hegel is likely to do. How do you think that might work out?
Well, I think it's a real challenge, but it's one that has to be addressed. It's where we're at. We have to recognize the fact of the nuclear, military, industrial, congressional
Media
status quo, realpolitik complex. I mean, there's a whole lot of groups and people who have enhanced their own credibility by taking a very status quo position on the situation with nuclear weapons. And in order to move forward, we need to take a more adventuresome position.
As Senator Roche said in one of the earlier interviews we had in this series, the problem with politics is you can only move as fast as the traffic will allow. And,
yes, I mean, Doug Roach is very wise in that way, and governments can only do what the nations will allow. But in the United States, we do have a fairly large nuclear, anti-nuclear weapon movement, and I think that should be given great heed.
So this development, anyway, must be very satisfying for you, of having spent, I think, virtually a lifetime in the pursuit of world peace and disarmament. But your work at the United Nations, in fact, was predated by your own even earlier interest in world peace.
Well, ever since I was 7 or 8 years old and wrote a poem in which the phrase world law crops up, and it was published in Parents Magazine. I've been very keen on world law, having the rule of law replace the force of law replace the law of force. That's the basic idea that I think is very important. And of course, when the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I was still quite young, but I could see that it was really, really the wrong thing to do. I mean, the Japanese would have surrendered anyway, so that was just an excuse for the United States to show off to Russia or the Soviet Union to show off that it had this capacity. But that was very unfortunate. In fact, I think it was 1948, I at a school sort of mock national election, I was playing the role of Henry Wallace, who at that time was a candidate for president and had been was at some point Roosevelt's vice president. Now, I thought that was the way to, that there was a lot of value in his views, and if he had been allowed by the Democratic Party to run as Roosevelt's vice president at that stage instead of Truman, I think the Cold War might not have happened. I was very disappointed with the Cold War. At the end of World War II, there was an opportunity to build peace. Now, of course, the Soviet Union was doing things like moving into Czechoslovakia and so forth, which was wrong. But that was no reason to create this mega confrontation system. So I was always opposed to that, and I was happy that the Cold War ended eventually, and I don't think we should pretend it's still there. I think we should take advantage of the opportunity and face the new challenges, which cannot really be addressed by nuclear weapons in any sense. I mean, the challenge of terrorism and extremism and poverty and global warming, all those challenges cannot be addressed by large weapons of mass destruction.
It's often said that the generals are always fighting the last war.
Right.
Well, the last war was the nuclear age anyway, and it's been pointed out that the real threat, the terrorist threat, as demonstrated so vividly at 9/11, involved an enemy armed only with paper cutters and plane tickets.
And ideas.
And ideas and resentment. The entire nuclear arsenal and the whole vast war machine of the United States was absolutely powerless to deal with that new confrontation. How did you originally become involved with the United Nations disarmament?
Well, I was active with the World Federalist Movement, which incidentally is one of the main engines behind the creation of the International Criminal Court. And that, of course, ties in with this idea of replacing the law of force with the force of law. So the idea of having direct jurisdiction over individuals instead of going to war, the Second World War. You know, there were times when, although the Versailles Treaty was very unfortunate, I realized that it wasn't necessary to combat the weaknesses of the League of Nations and the Versailles Treaty with war. There were opportunities to arrest people in Germany when they remilitarized the Rhineland, for example, going against the treaty agreements. There were opportunities, in theory at least, to deal with the individual illegal actions and not allow Hitler to gain the momentum to create an enormous machine for what became the Second World War. So I was always looking for opportunities to replace the law of force with the force of law. And like lots of people during World War II, I was concerned that we not have another League of Nations, which wouldn't work. I was concerned, for one thing, with the idea of direct jurisdiction over individuals, which is what the International Criminal Court does. Rather than punishing a whole nation by having a war between nations, we needed to have the opportunity to arrest and apprehend individuals who were pushing for the crime of aggression, who were creating war crimes, et cetera, et cetera. So that was something that I realized, I think, during the Second World War. That idea came into my mind that we needed to have a different system of international justice and jurisdiction without having to go to war. So when the UN Charter was signed in San Francisco, and the UN looked really quite a lot like the League of Nations. I mean, instead of every country having a veto, there are only 5 that have a veto. But that wasn't really good enough, according to lots of people who were hoping for a stronger international system after the war. And I was one of those people, although I was only in high school at the time. And I thought, we've got to do better than this. And when I heard about the World Federalists, that got me really interested in this opportunity to build a strong UN system. So I was involved from 1948 until now in working for world peace through world law. And the UN, in my opinion, is the best vehicle. For one thing, it's universal. For another thing, it contains the capacity to do development assistance, human rights. It is focused on the responsibility to protect people from states. Kofi Annan made it quite clear that people should have priority over states. So the UN is definitely fitting into my ideology. People first, people and planet first are my mottos. And well, I wanted to work for the UN, but I was living in London. I was married to a British journalist who worked for the BBC. And I, followed all these issues, but I was not where the UN really was. I mean, International Maritime Organization is in London, but that's all. So then when I had the opportunity to come to New York and live back in the United States again, because I come from this country, I actually initially got a job with UNICEF, where Jim Grant, who was the Director General of UNICEF for quite a number of years, and he was a good friend of mine, and he was very supportive of these ideas. And he's also someone who gave a lot of attention to the total elimination of contagious diseases, as many people know, and careful measurement in order to make sure that it would really happen. So he's someone I admired a lot. So initially I came and worked very briefly for UNICEF. There was a slot open for 10 months, I believe. And then I began looking for a job elsewhere in the UN. And I knew quite a lot about disarmament and such. And I knew Bill Epstein. Bill Epstein claimed to be the first person to work for the UN, and the person who worked for the UN Secretariat longer than anyone else. Well, the story behind his career is that he was in the Canadian military, and he was a lawyer. And at the end of the Second World War, he was very busy helping Canadian soldiers get out of jail after they'd knocked the edge off a pub with bad driving or drunken driving, or they'd knocked up a young woman or something, slightly dubious. And so somebody, I guess from the Canadian government, came and asked him if he'd be willing to join the UN Secretariat. And he said, "Oh, yes, great. So he was one of the people in the original work of the UN that started in London. And then initially he was the Secretary General's advisor on Palestine and Israel, but eventually, after several years, it was decided that it wasn't appropriate to have a Jew in that position. So he was shuffled over to disarmament, and he became totally dedicated to working for disarmament. And I knew him through the non-governmental organizations that we were both connected with, and he sort of helped me insinuate myself into the UN, I think, in disarmament.
And you have now, since then, become involved in dozens of other organizations. Your name appears on almost every letterhead of every major peace and disarmament organization in the world now. Who are some of the other giant figures?
Well, in the World Federalists, there was Norman Cousins, who used to write a lot of speeches for key people, including President Kennedy, and including U Thant, and including the ambassador of the Philippines. The Philippine mission wasn't very highly staffed, and so they were happy to have assistance from the outside. And Norman Cousins was a great forward thinker of how the UN ought to be. And I think through Norman Cousins I got to know C.V. Narasimhan, who was the chef de cabinet of U Thant. And I don't know, one way and another I came to know a lot of people in the UN and in the international NGO community interested in peace and disarmament.
What sort of role can the NGOs play? Now, people will listen to us, but do the NGOs, many of whom have been very disappointed over the last years with the pace of disarmament, how effective have the NGOs been? How effective can they be?
Well, it's a sine qua non to have public opinion lead the way, as Ambassador Roach said, as you indicated. But it's difficult to do it in a way that has real power. So I think President Obama has put forward goals that NGOs can help to delineate and advocate and teach. And this is very important. And with Senator Hagel in there, I think there's a great opportunity to really move forward. I'm also very interested in economic justice, economic development. More recently, I've been a big supporter of the work of, Economists for Peace and Security, for one, which is working for lower arms budgets and more budgeting for development and more learning by economists. Economists are generally judged as knowing things. Well, maybe they do and maybe they don't, but at least they're respected. So getting economists out front pointing to the greater efficiency of pushing for development instead of for armaments is one way to go. Also, one of the leaders of UNICEF sometime after Jim Grant, Sir Richard Jolly, and he's a good friend of mine also. There are lots of people who are in public opinion leadership roles who are in favor of economic and social development and all the work that UNDP does and all these things in lieu of having military focus. We had too much of a military focus for too long during the Cold War, and now it's time to move forward.
Do you find you are in competition for the support and funding and attention, particularly of young people, from such new, emerging, challenging issues like global warming, for example?
Yes. I think the problem of climate change and global warming is something else that needs a lot of attention from the broad public and the leadership public in the NGOs. I think that's extremely important. And I'm very glad to see all these young people who are focusing on that issue and moving forward there.
Do you find that there's, among young people, almost an acceptance that this is the way the world is? There are people with atomic bombs, and in their thousands of atomic bombs, and there's the sun and the moon and the stars and the bombs, and that this is the way the world is, that there's an acceptance or simply an exhaustion among the disarmament organizations.
Well, I think generally people do not relate very much to things over which they think they have no control at all. So it is difficult to find places where the engagement of individual citizens, and particularly young people, can make at least some difference. But they just need to see how important it is. I don't think people believe that nuclear weapons need to be with us forever. I don't think that people believe that is a functional thing to allow to happen. On the other hand, people do get discouraged. They don't engage enough.
Well, finally, if I may ask, looking ahead, you spoke of the need for world law and the role that the United Nations plays in that. Well, of course, there are treaties now which America has rather conspicuously not signed on to. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Law of the Sea, the International Criminal Court.
Yeah, but the United States participates in the work of the International Criminal Court, goes to the assemblies of states parties and such. So it's just sort of waiting for an opportunity. It's very difficult to get new treaties through the Senate. This is a major problem. And
do you think that the Obama administration is more likely to at least press these
Oh,
issues?
yes. But I think President Obama is quite careful not to do things in a counterproductive way. So he doesn't want to push forward and create a push back. So it's difficult. We need to build the support for the full implementation of the International Criminal Court, which is working very well. in its limited way, and that's important. And I support the idea of Ben Ferenz, who was one of the chief prosecutors at Nuremberg, which of course was the first time that this idea was put into play, where you hold individuals responsible for war, for crimes against humanity and war crimes and such. So Ben Ferenz is keen to have the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court or include the crime of aggression or taking action, which has to be done by individuals through states to create war. So expanding the role of the ICC is one of the many things that needs to be done. But getting the United States engaged is a big task. And Citizens for Global Solutions, which is one of the which is the main U.S. component of the World Federalist Movement, is looking for like-minded attitudes throughout the nation. Well, at the moment we're pushing for women's the U.S. signature of the treaty against all forms of discrimination against women, but CEDAW, which the United States is one of a very small number of countries that have not endorsed it, but also we're working for general attitudes of support for international law and order and justice.
And so finally, would you agree that at least now the times they are a-changing and the opportunities for change?
Yes. I do think that the ideas that President Obama has, and which led him to propose the Chuck Hagel for the Defense Department, are ideas that young people can pick up on, people with a worldview that recognizes that the United States is not the world. The United States may be the most powerful country in many ways, but we have to work with other countries, and this multilateralism through the UN is extremely important.
Well, it has been said that sometimes in times of rapid change, oldest eyes see farthest. So your own look to the horizon is that things are getting better?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think there's hope.
Lucy Law Webster, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your history with us here today.
Thank you.